The morning sun cast long shadows across the small settlement as 16-year-old Elena Martinez knelt beside the river, washing clothes with hands that had grown rough from endless chores. Her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders, and her brown eyes held a depth that seemed older than her years. She had learned early that life on the frontier demanded strength, but nothing could have prepared her for what this day would bring. Elena lived with her stepfather, Thomas Brennan, and her mother, Maria, in a crude wooden cabin on the edge of the Texas wilderness. Thomas was a hard man who had married her mother not for love, but for the convenience of having someone to cook and clean while he pursued his dreams of striking it rich in the gold fields. He viewed Elena as nothing more than an extra mouth to feed, a burden he had inherited along with his new wife. The settlement was small, consisting of perhaps 20 families who had banded together for protection against the harsh realities of frontier life. There were the Johnsons, who ran the general store, the Parkers, who raised cattle, and the Reverend Williams, who conducted services in the schoolhouse every Sunday. Each family struggled to carve out an existence in this unforgiving land, but they looked out for one another as best they could. Elena had few friends among the other young people in the settlement. Most of the girls her age were already married or promised to young men, and the boys seemed to avoid her. Perhaps it was because of Thomas's reputation as a violent man, or perhaps it was because Elena herself was different. She spoke Spanish fluently, having learned it from her mother, and she knew things about the wilderness that the other settlers did not. Her mother had taught her which plants could heal and which could harm, knowledge passed down from her grandmother who had lived among the Apache before marrying Elena's father. This particular morning had started like any other. Elena woke before dawn to start the fire and prepare breakfast. Thomas barely acknowledged her presence as he ate his cornbread and salt pork, his eyes already focused on whatever scheme he was planning for the day. Her mother moved about the cabin like a ghost, her spirit seemingly broken by years of Thomas's harsh treatment. Maria had once been a vibrant woman, full of laughter and stories, but those days seemed like distant memories now. As Elena worked by the river, she noticed unusual activity in the settlement. Men were gathering in small groups, speaking in hushed tones, and casting nervous glances toward the horizon. She caught fragments of their conversations, words about raids, missing cattle, and tracks found near the settlement's perimeter. The Comanche had been more active lately, and fear was beginning to grip the community. When Elena returned to the cabin with the clean laundry, she found Thomas in deep conversation with several other men from the settlement. Their faces were grim, and their voices carried an edge of desperation that made her stomach tighten with worry. She tried to listen without appearing to eavesdrop, but it was difficult to make sense of their words. "We need to do something," she heard one man say. "They took the Henderson boy last week, and now they're getting bolder. What do you suggest?" Thomas replied, his voice cold and calculating. "We don't have enough men to fight them off if they come in force. Maybe we need to try a different approach," suggested another voice. "Maybe we need to give them what they want before they take it by force." Elena felt a chill run down her spine at those words, though she didn't yet understand their full meaning. She went about her chores, tried to push down the growing sense of unease that was building in her chest. Something was wrong, something beyond the usual dangers of frontier life. That evening, as the family sat down for their meager dinner, Thomas was unusually quiet. He kept glancing at Elena with an expression she couldn't read, and when their eyes met, he would quickly look away. Her mother seemed even more withdrawn than usual, barely touching her food and jumping at every sound from outside. "Elena," Thomas finally spoke, his voice strangely formal. "Tomorrow, you're going to take a ride with me. We're going to visit some folks outside the settlement." "What folks?" Elena asked, surprised. Thomas had never shown any interest in taking her anywhere before. "Business associates," he replied curtly. "You don't need to know more than that. Just be ready to leave at first light." Elena's mother looked up sharply, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear. "Thomas, surely there's another way. There is no other way." Thomas cut her off, his voice harsh. "This is how it has to be. The decision has been made." Elena felt confusion swirling in her mind. What decision? What was her stepfather talking about? She tried to catch her mother's eye, looking for some explanation, but Maria had turned away, her shoulders shaking with what Elena realized were silent sobs. The rest of the evening passed in uncomfortable silence. Elena helped clean up after dinner and prepared for bed, but sleep eluded her. She lay on her thin mattress, staring at the rough wooden ceiling and trying to make sense of the strange conversation at dinner. Outside, she could hear the wind rustling through the trees and the distant howl of a wolf, sounds that usually comforted her, but tonight seemed ominous. When she finally did drift off to sleep, Elena's dreams were filled with dark images she couldn't quite grasp. She found herself running through a forest, chased by shadows that seemed to reach for her with grasping fingers. She woke several times during the night, her heart racing and her body covered in cold sweat. The next morning arrived gray and overcast, with heavy clouds that promised rain before the day was over. Elena rose early, as was her habit, but found that Thomas was already up and preparing his horse. He had saddled Elena's mare as well, and both animals seemed restless, as if they could sense the tension in the air. "Hurry up," Thomas called to her as she emerged from the cabin. "We need to be moving soon." Elena quickly gathered her few belongings, though she wasn't sure why she felt the need to take anything for what Thomas had described as a simple visit. Her mother stood in the doorway, her face pale and her hands clutching a worn shawl around her shoulders. "Mama." Elena approached her mother, hoping for some word of explanation or comfort. Maria reached out and pulled Elena into a fierce embrace, holding her so tightly that it almost hurt. "Remember who you are, Mija," she whispered urgently in Spanish. "Remember what I taught you about the plants, about surviving in the wild. Be strong, be smart, and never give up hope." "Mama, what are you talking about?" Elena pulled back, studying her mother's face. "I'll be back tonight, won't I?" Maria's eyes filled with tears, but before she could answer, Thomas's harsh voice cut through the moment. "Enough of this nonsense. We're leaving now." Elena mounted her horse, still confused and increasingly worried by her mother's strange behavior. As they rode away from the settlement, she looked back to see her mother still standing in the doorway, one hand raised in what looked almost like a final farewell. The ride was long and uncomfortable. Thomas spoke little, only grunting responses when Elena tried to ask questions about their destination or the purpose of their journey. They followed a narrow trail that Elena had never seen before, winding through dense forest and across rocky streams. The further they traveled from the settlement, the more isolated and wild the landscape became. As the hours passed, Elena began to notice signs that they were not alone in the wilderness. She spotted tracks in the soft earth, unshod hoofprints that could only belong to Indian ponies. Thomas seemed to be following these tracks deliberately, which made no sense if they were truly going to visit friends or business associates. "Thomas," Elena finally spoke up, her voice tight with growing fear. "Where exactly are we going? These don't look like trails that lead to any settler cabins I know of." Thomas reined in his horse and turned to look at her, his face hard and unforgiving. "You'll know soon enough," he said. "Just keep riding and keep quiet." They continued for another hour until they reached a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. In the center of the clearing, Elena could see the remains of an old campfire and what looked like the remnants of an Indian encampment. Her heart began to race as the terrible truth started to dawn on her. "Thomas, what is this place? Why did you bring me here?" Thomas dismounted and began removing supplies from his saddlebags, rope, some dried meat, and a canteen of water. He avoided meeting Elena's eyes as he worked, his movements quick and efficient, as if he wanted to finish this business as quickly as possible. "The Comanche have been raiding our settlement," he said finally, his voice flat and emotionless. "Taking our cattle, threatening our families. The men got together and decided we needed to offer them something to make them go away and leave us in peace." Elena's blood turned to ice as understanding flooded through her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "You can't mean you're young and strong?" Thomas continued, still not looking at her. "You'll be valuable to them. Maybe they'll take you and leave the rest of us alone for a while." Elena spurred her horse backward, but Thomas was ready for her reaction. He grabbed her reins and held them tight, his grip strong despite his advancing years. "Please," Elena begged, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't do this. I'll work harder. I'll cause no trouble. Please, Thomas. I'm your daughter now. You're not my daughter," Thomas said coldly. "You're Maria's burden that I've carried long enough. This way, at least you'll serve some useful purpose." Elena tried desperately to pull free, but Thomas was stronger and more determined. He dragged her from her horse and began tying her hands behind her back with practiced efficiency. It was clear he had planned this carefully, probably for days or even weeks. The Comanche scouts have been watching this place, Thomas explained as he worked. They'll find you here within hours. If you're smart, you'll convince them you're worth keeping alive. If not, he shrugged, as if her fate was no concern of his. Elena's mind raced, searching for any possibility of escape or rescue. But they were miles from the settlement, alone in the wilderness with no hope of help. Thomas finished tying her to a sturdy pine tree, positioned so she could sit but not escape. The rope will loosen eventually if you work at it, Thomas said, his voice now carrying a note of what might have been guilt. Maybe you'll get free before they find you. Maybe you won't. Either way, it's out of my hands now. He mounted his horse and took the reins of Elena's mare. For a moment, he looked back at her, and Elena thought she saw something like regret flicker across his features. But then his face hardened again, and he spurred his horse forward. Please, Elena called after him, her voice echoing through the forest. Please don't leave me here, Thomas. But he was already disappearing through the trees, and soon the sound of hoofbeats faded into silence. Elena was alone in the wilderness, tied to a tree like bait for predators, abandoned by the only family she had known. The afternoon stretched endlessly before her. Elena tested the ropes that bound her, but Thomas had tied them well. She could move enough to stay somewhat comfortable, but escape seemed impossible. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Elena felt despair beginning to creep into her heart. She thought about her mother, probably sick with worry and guilt at home. She thought about the life she had planned, simple dreams of perhaps marrying a kind man from the settlement and raising a family of her own. All of that seemed impossibly distant now, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. But as darkness began to fall, Elena heard something that made her blood freeze. The sound of horses approaching, moving stealthily through the forest. She could hear voices speaking in a language she recognized, but couldn't understand, the Comanche language her mother had mentioned but never taught her. Elena closed her eyes and tried to remember everything her mother had told her about survival, about being strong in the face of impossible odds. Whatever happened next, she would not give up. She would not let Thomas's betrayal be the end of her story. Somehow, someway, she would survive this and find her way back to freedom. The sound of horses grew closer, and Elena knew that her real trial was about to begin. The Comanche warriors emerged from the forest like phantoms, their horses moving with silent grace across the forest floor. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched them approach, their painted faces and fierce expressions making them appear almost supernatural in the fading light. There were 5 of them, all mounted on swift ponies, their weapons gleaming in the twilight. The leader was a man of perhaps 40 years, his face marked with intricate tattoos and scars that spoke of countless battles. His long black hair was adorned with feathers and beads, and his eyes held a coldness that made Elena shiver. He studied her for a long moment without speaking, his gaze taking in every detail of her situation. The other warriors spread out around the clearing, their eyes scanning the forest for signs of ambush or trickery. They spoke to each other in low voices, their tones suggesting suspicion and wariness. Elena caught fragments of their conversation, recognizing a few words that her mother had mentioned in stories about her grandmother's time among the Apache. One of the younger warriors pointed at Elena and spoke rapidly to the leader, gesturing toward the ropes and the obvious signs that she had been deliberately left here. The leader's expression darkened, and he barked something that made the others laugh grimly. Elena didn't need to understand their language to know that they recognized this as some kind of trap or offering. The leader dismounted and approached Elena slowly, his moccasined feet making no sound on the forest floor. He knelt in front of her and studied her face intently, his dark eyes searching for something she couldn't identify. When he spoke, his English was heavily accented, but clear. "You are left here by your people," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. "Like meat for wolves." "Why?" Elena swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. They think if they give you something, you'll leave them alone." The leader's lips curved in what might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "And what do you think?" "I think they're fools," Elena said, surprising herself with her boldness. And I think they're cowards for leaving a girl to face what they're too scared to face themselves. The warrior studied her for another long moment, then spoke to his companions in their own language. Elena heard heated discussion, with some warriors seeming to argue for one course of action while others disagreed. Finally, the leader held up his hand for silence. "I'm White Eagle," he said to Elena, "war leader of the Iron Horse Band. These are my warriors. We have been watching your settlement for many days, learning your weakness." Elena felt her stomach drop. If they had been watching the settlement, then Thomas's plan had been even more foolish than she thought. The Comanche already knew everything they needed to know about the settlers' defenses and numbers. "What will you do with me?" Elena asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "That depends," White Eagle replied. "Are you worth keeping alive?" Before Elena could answer, one of the younger warriors called out urgently from the edge of the clearing. White Eagle rose smoothly and joined his men, leaving Elena tied to the tree while they held a quick conference. She could see them pointing in different directions and gesturing toward the trails that led back toward the settlement. After a few minutes, White Eagle returned to her. His expression had grown more serious, and Elena sensed that something had changed in their situation. "More of your people come," he told her. "Armed men, following the trail you and the old one made. Perhaps they think to rescue you, or perhaps they think to kill us when we come for our gift." Elena's heart leaped. Could it be that someone from the settlement had decided to come after her? But then reality set in. If armed settlers were approaching, they would likely shoot first and ask questions later. She could be killed in the crossfire, or worse, her presence might give the Comanche an advantage they could use against her own people. "Please," Elena said urgently. "If you let me go, I can tell them not to attack. No one else has to die here." White Eagle looked at her with what might have been amusement. "You think your life is worth the lives of warriors who come to kill us?" "I think more death won't solve anything," Elena replied. "And I think you're smart enough to know that, too." The Comanche leader was quiet for a moment, then called to one of his warriors. The man approached and began cutting Elena's bonds with a sharp knife. She rubbed her wrists gratefully as the circulation returned to her hands. "You'll come with us," White Eagle said. "If your people want to trade fire with us, they will have to do it knowing you are in the middle." Elena realized with growing dread that the Comanche intended to use her as a human shield. But before she could protest, the sound of approaching horses filled the clearing. The warriors quickly took defensive positions behind trees and rocks, their weapons ready. A group of 6 men from the settlement burst into the clearing, led by James Parker, one of the cattle ranchers. They pulled up short when they saw the abandoned campfire and the cut ropes at the base of the tree. Elena could see the confusion and fear on their faces as they realized they had ridden into a trap. "Where is she?" Parker called out, his rifle raised and ready. "Where's the girl?" White Eagle stepped out from behind a tree, his own weapon lowered but ready. Elena stood beside him, acutely aware that any sudden movement could trigger a massacre. "I am here," Elena called out before anyone could react. "I'm alive, but please don't shoot. They haven't hurt me." Parker's eyes widened when he saw Elena standing next to the Comanche war leader. "Elena, get away from him. Get over here. She stays where she is," White Eagle said calmly. "Your people gave her to us. Now you come and take her back? What kind of game is this?" Elena could see the settlers looking at each other with confusion. It was clear that not all of them had known about Thomas's plan to abandon her in the forest. Some of them looked genuinely shocked to learn what had been done in their name. "We didn't know," Parker said finally. "We didn't know what Brennan had planned. When your wife told us where you'd gone, we came to bring you home. My mother sent you." Elena felt a surge of hope. "She was half out of her mind with grief," Parker replied. "Said she couldn't live with what had been done. Made us swear to find you and bring you back." White Eagle listened to this exchange with growing interest. "So your people make war on each other as well as us? Interesting." The tension in the clearing was thick enough to cut with a knife. Elena could see fingers tightening on triggers and hands moving toward weapons. One wrong word or sudden movement would turn this into a bloodbath. "Please," Elena spoke up, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet evening air. "No one else needs to die because of what Thomas did. Let me talk to White Eagle alone. Maybe we can find a way for everyone to walk away from this." "Elena, no," Parker protested. "You're not safe with him." "I'm not safe anywhere right now," Elena replied truthfully. "But maybe I can make it better for everyone." White Eagle studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You may speak," he said, "but You men stay where they are. Any movement toward weapons, and this conversation ends badly. Elena took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes could determine whether she lived or died, and whether the men who had come to rescue her made it home to their families. You said you've been watching our settlement, she began. So you know we're just farmers and ranchers, not soldiers. We have women and children there who have never hurt anyone. And yet you take our land, kill our buffalo, and drive away our game, White Eagle replied. Your people bring nothing but death to ours. Some of us do, Elena acknowledged, but not all of us. My mother taught me that your people believe all life is connected, that harming one creature harms the whole world. If that's true, then surely there's a way for us to share this land without destroying each other. White Eagle's expression remained unreadable, but Elena thought she detected a flicker of interest in his eyes. Behind him, she could see the other Comanche warriors watching the conversation intently. You speak our philosophy, but your people do not live it, White Eagle said. They see only what they can take, not what they give back. Then, maybe it's time for that to change, Elena said desperately. Maybe there's a way to teach both sides a better way. The Comanche leader was quiet for a long time, his gaze moving between Elena and the mounted settlers. Finally, he spoke to his warriors in their own language, and Elena heard what sounded like heated discussion. My warriors say you are foolish to trust white words, White Eagle told her. They say your people will promise peace while sharpening their knives in secret. They might be right, Elena admitted. But what's the alternative? More raids? More killing? More children growing up to hate each other? Where does it end? White Eagle studied her face intently. You are not like other whites I have met, he said finally. There is something different in your spirit. Elena thought of her mother's stories, of the Apache grandmother she had never met but whose blood flowed in her veins. Maybe that's because I'm not entirely white, she said quietly. This revelation seemed to surprise White Eagle. He asked her something in what Elena thought might be Apache, and when she looked confused, he switched back to English. Your grandmother was Apache? Yes, my mother's mother. She lived with your people before she married my grandfather. White Eagle spoke rapidly to his warriors, and Elena caught the word Apache several times in their discussion. Whatever her heritage meant to them, it seemed to be significant. If this is true, White Eagle said slowly, then you are not just a white settler's daughter. You are connected to the people of this land in a way your friends do not understand. Elena nodded, hoping this might give her some leverage in the negotiation. My grandmother taught my mother the old ways, and my mother taught some of them to me. I know the plants that heal and the plants that harm. I know the stories of how the world was made, and why all creatures must respect each other. One of the older Comanche warriors approached and spoke to White Eagle in a low, urgent voice. Elena couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clearly one of advice or warning. White Eagle listened carefully, then asked Elena a direct question. If we let your people take you back to their settlement, what will happen then? Will they listen to words of peace, or will they prepare for war? Elena thought carefully before answering. Some will listen, she said honestly. Others won't. But if you let me try to build trust between our peoples, I promise I'll do everything I can to prevent more bloodshed. And if you fail? Elena met his gaze steadily. Then, at least we'll know we tried something other than killing each other. White Eagle turned to Parker and the other settlers, who had been waiting tensely during this long conversation. You came to rescue this girl, he said, but she is no longer the same person you left behind. She has spoken truth to us and shown respect for our ways. If you take her back, will your people honor the wisdom she has gained here? Parker looked confused, clearly not understanding the depth of what had just transpired. We just want to take her home safe, he said. Safe is not enough, White Eagle replied. Will they listen to her words about peace? Elena could see Parker struggling with concepts that were completely foreign to his experience. I don't know, he said finally. That would be up to the whole community to decide. White Eagle nodded, as if this was the answer he had expected. He turned back to Elena with an expression that seemed almost sad. Your people do not understand the responsibility that comes with wisdom, he said. But perhaps you do. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? I mean that sometimes to save many lives, one person must be willing to sacrifice their own comfortable existence. White Eagle paused, studying her face. Are you willing to leave your people and come with us? to learn the full truth of your grandmother's people, and perhaps find a way to bridge the gap between our worlds? The question hit Elena like a physical blow. Leave everything she had ever known? Go into the wilderness with these warriors who could kill her at any moment? And yet, as she looked around the clearing at the tense faces of the settlers and the stoic expressions of the Comanche, she realized that this might be the only chance to prevent a war that would destroy both communities. "If I come with you," she said carefully, "what guarantee do I have that I'll be treated well? And what guarantee do my people have that you won't attack the settlement anyway?" "No guarantees," White Eagle replied bluntly. "Life offers no guarantees. But if you prove yourself worthy of trust, you will be treated as family. And if you can truly build a bridge between our peoples, there may be hope for peace." Elena closed her eyes, thinking of her mother's tears that morning, of the simple life she had dreamed of all the things she would be giving up. But she also thought of the children in the settlement, both white and Comanche, who would grow up in a world of violence and hatred if someone didn't try to change things. When she opened her eyes, her decision was made. "I'll come with you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. "But I want these men to be allowed to return safely to the settlement. And I want you to promise that there will be no raids while I'm learning your ways." White Eagle smiled for the first time since she had met him, and Elena was surprised to see that it transformed his entire face. "You bargain like a true warrior," he said approvingly. "Very well. Your men may return in peace, and we will hold our weapons while you walk among us. But understand this. If you try to escape or betray us, the agreement dies with you." Elena nodded, understanding the weight of what she was agreeing to. She turned to face Parker and the other settlers, knowing that this might be the last time she saw familiar faces for a very long time. "Tell my mother I love her," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "And tell the others that I'm doing this because I believe it's the only way to keep everyone safe." Parker's face was pale with shock. "Elena, you can't do this. You don't know what you're getting into." "Maybe not," Elena replied. "But I know what happens if nobody tries to change things. Tell Thomas his plan failed, but maybe something good can come from it anyway." As the settlers reluctantly prepared to leave without her, Elena felt the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. She was no longer the girl who had washed clothes by the river that morning. She was something new, something that had never existed before, a bridge between two worlds that had been at war for as long as anyone could remember. Whether that bridge would hold or whether it would collapse and take her with it remained to be seen. Elena's first night with the Comanche was unlike anything she had ever experienced. As darkness fell completely over the forest, the warriors built a small, carefully concealed fire and shared dried meat and water with her. They spoke quietly among themselves in their own language, occasionally glancing at her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to suspicion. White Eagle sat across from her, studying her face in the flickering firelight. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said finally. "What stories did your mother share?" Elena thought back to the quiet evenings when her mother would speak of the old days, usually when Thomas was away from the cabin. "She said my grandmother could speak to the spirits in the wind, that she knew the language of animals, and could find water where others saw only dry earth." "And what else?" "She said my grandmother was taken as a child during a raid, but that she chose to stay with the Apache because she found more kindness among them than she had known in her birth family." Elena paused, realizing how parallel her own situation was to her grandmother's story. One of the younger warriors, who had been introduced to Elena as Running Wolf, spoke up in halting English. "This is true? Your grandmother Apache?" Elena nodded. "My mother said she died when I was very small, but that she blessed me before she passed, and said I carried the spirit of both peoples within me." White Eagle translated this for the others, and Elena heard murmurs of what sounded like approval. Running Wolf asked another question in Comanche, which White Eagle answered at length before turning back to Elena. Running Wolf asks if you know any of the plant medicine your grandmother would have known. This is important knowledge among our people. Elena felt a spark of hope. "Yes, some. My mother taught me that willow bark can ease pain and fever, that echinacea can fight infection, and that sage can cleanse both body and spirit. She showed me how to find edible roots and berries, and which mushrooms are safe to eat." The warriors exchanged glances, and Elena sensed that this knowledge was indeed significant to them. White Eagle nodded approvingly. Good. This will help you survive what comes next. What comes next? Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Tomorrow we begin the journey to our main camp. It is many days' travel through country that will test your strength and courage. Some of my people will want to see you fail to prove that whites cannot truly become part of our world. Elena felt her stomach tighten. And if I do fail? White Eagle's expression was grave. Then you will die in the wilderness, and there will be no bridge between our peoples. The war will continue until one side or the other is destroyed completely. The weight of responsibility settled even more heavily on Elena's shoulders. She thought of the children in the settlement, playing in the dusty streets without understanding that their entire world might depend on her ability to prove herself worthy of acceptance among people she barely understood. That night, Elena slept fitfully on the hard ground, wrapped in a blanket that one of the warriors had given her. She dreamed of her mother's face, of the cabin she might never see again, and of vast landscapes filled with dangers she couldn't imagine. When she woke before dawn, she found White Eagle already up and preparing his horse. Today we begin, he said simply. Stay close to me and do not speak unless spoken to. Some of my warriors still believe you are a spy or a trick from your people. The journey that followed was the most physically demanding experience of Elena's young life. The Comanche traveled fast and light, covering ground at a pace that left her exhausted and aching. They rode for hours without stopping, following trails that seemed invisible to Elena, but which the warriors navigated with perfect confidence. On the second day, they encountered a small band of Comanche returning from a hunting expedition. Elena watched nervously as White Eagle spoke with their leader, a weathered man with a prominent scar across his left cheek. The conversation grew heated, and Elena caught enough words to understand that her presence was causing controversy. Some of our people believe whites can never be trusted, White Eagle explained to her later as they made camp beside a small stream. They say you will learn our secrets and then betray us to your people. What do you believe? Elena asked. I believe in watching and learning, White Eagle replied. Your actions will speak louder than your words. As the days passed, Elena began to understand the rhythm of life on the trail. She learned to identify safe water sources, to read the signs that indicated good hunting grounds, and to move silently through the forest. The warriors began testing her in small ways, asking her to gather firewood, to help prepare food, to assist with caring for the horses. One evening, as they camped in a hidden valley, Elena noticed that one of the horses was limping. Without being asked, she approached the animal carefully and examined its hoof. She found a sharp stone wedged deep in the frog and worked patiently to remove it without causing further injury. Running Wolf, who owned the horse, watched her work with growing respect. When she successfully extracted the stone and the horse walked normally again, he spoke to her in Comanche for the first time, his tone warm with gratitude. He says, "You have gentle hands and a kind heart," White Eagle translated. This is high praise from Running Wolf. He is known for his skill with animals. Elena felt a small glow of accomplishment, but she also understood that this was just the beginning of her trials. Each day brought new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself worthy of the trust the Comanche were slowly beginning to place in her. On the fifth day of their journey, they encountered a more serious test. A young Comanche woman named Morning Star had been traveling with her infant son to visit relatives when her horse had been injured in a fall. The woman was stranded beside a river, unable to continue her journey and too proud to abandon her belongings. White Eagle's band could have easily ridden around the stranded traveler, but Elena watched as the war leader made the decision to stop and help. However, when Morning Star saw Elena, her expression hardened with suspicion and anger. The woman spoke rapidly to White Eagle, her voice rising in what was clearly an argument. Elena didn't need to understand the words to know that Morning Star was protesting her presence in the band. She says whites have killed her husband and taken her eldest son, White Eagle explained quietly to Elena. She does not want to be rescued by enemies of her people. Elena felt her heart breaking for the woman's losses, but she also recognized an opportunity to prove her sincerity. Ask her if she would accept help from her sister, she said. White Eagle raised an eyebrow. Sister, tell her that my grandmother was Apache and that I carry the blood of the people in my veins. Tell her that I mourn for her losses and wish only to ease her pain." White Eagle translated Elena's words, and Elena watched Morning Star's expression change from anger to surprise to careful consideration. The woman studied Elena's face intently, then asked a series of rapid questions. "She wants to know if you understand the responsibility that comes with claiming kinship with our people," White Eagle said. "She asks if you are willing to accept the obligations as well as the protection that such a claim would bring." Elena thought carefully before answering. She was beginning to understand that among these people, words carried far more weight than they did in the settlement where she had grown up. "Tell her that I understand my grandmother's spirit lives on in me, and that I am willing to honor her memory by serving those who shared her blood." Morningstar listened to the translation, then approached Elena slowly. She reached out and touched Elena's face gently, studying her features with the intensity of someone seeking truth in the bones and blood. Finally, the woman spoke, and Elena heard approval in her tone for the first time. "She sees your grandmother in the shape of your eyes and the set of your mouth," White Eagle translated. "She says the spirits have guided you back to your true family." Elena felt tears welling up as Morning Star embraced her gently, careful not to wake the sleeping infant. In that moment, Elena understood that she had passed some crucial test, earning not just tolerance, but actual acceptance from at least one member of the tribe. They spent the rest of the day helping Morning Star repair her damaged travois and tend to her injured horse. Elena worked alongside the Comanche women, learning techniques for treating injured animals and organizing supplies for travel. She began to pick up more words of the Comanche language and found that many concepts were similar to the Apache words her mother had taught her. That evening, as they shared a meal around the fire, Morning Star spoke to Elena directly for the first time. Her English was limited but clear. "Your grandmother's spirit is strong in you," she said, "but White World has made you soft. You must learn to be hard like stone, soft like grass." Both together. Elena nodded, beginning to understand that her education among the Comanche would involve more than just learning their language and customs. She would have to fundamentally change the way she thought about survival, community, and her place in the natural world. Over the following days, as they continued toward the main camp, Morning Star began teaching Elena in earnest. She showed her how to read weather signs and the movement of clouds and the behavior of animals. She taught her to identify edible plants that Elena had never seen before and explained the spiritual significance of various natural phenomena. "White people see land as thing to own," Morning Star explained one afternoon as they walked along a ridge overlooking a vast prairie. "We know land owns us. We belong to it, not it to us." Elena struggled to understand this concept, which challenged everything she had been taught about property and ownership. In the settlement, a man's worth was often measured by how much land he could claim and defend. Here, she was learning that true wealth lay in understanding one's place in the intricate web of relationships that connected all living things. The lessons were not always easy to accept. Elena had grown up believing in the superiority of settled agricultural life over what the settlers called savage nomadism. Now she was beginning to see that the Comanche way of life was far more complex and sophisticated than she had ever imagined. As they crested a hill on the 8th day of their journey, Elena got her first glimpse of the main Comanche camp. Spread across a wide valley were dozens of teepees, arranged in family clusters with a large central area for communal activities. Horses grazed in nearby meadows, and she could see people moving about their daily tasks. "This is your new home," White Eagle said, watching Elena's face carefully. "Here you will learn whether you truly have the strength to build bridges between worlds." Elena stared down at the camp, knowing that everything that had happened to her so far had been just preparation for the real test that lay ahead. In that village were people who had lost family members to white settlers, who had every reason to hate and distrust her presence among them. But as she looked at the peaceful scene below, Elena also saw children playing, women working together, and men caring for their horses with the same dedication she had seen among the ranchers in her own settlement. These were not the savage raiders that white people feared, but families trying to preserve their way of life in an increasingly hostile world. "I'm ready," Elena said, and was surprised to find that she meant it. Whatever trials awaited her in that camp, she was determined to face them with the courage her grandmother would have shown. As they began the final descent toward the valley, Elena felt as though she was riding toward her destiny. Behind her lay the life of a frightened girl who had been abandoned in the wilderness. Ahead lay the unknown future of a woman who might one day serve as a bridge between two worlds that desperately needed to find a way to coexist. The wind carried the sounds of the camp up to meet them. Children's laughter, the lowing of cattle, and the rhythmic sound of women singing as they worked. Elena closed her eyes and let these sounds wash over her, trying to imagine herself as part of this community rather than an outsider looking in. When she opened her eyes, the camp was much closer, and she could see people stopping their work to watch the approaching band of warriors. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion, and a few displayed open hostility. Elena straightened her shoulders and prepared to face whatever reception awaited her. She had come too far to turn back now. Elena's entrance into the Comanche camp created an immediate stir. Women emerged from their teepees to stare at the white girl riding alongside their warriors, while children stopped their games to gape in wonder and fear. Men paused in their work with horses and weapons, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. White Eagle led the group toward the center of the camp, where a large teepee decorated with painted symbols stood apart from the others. Elena understood without being told that this belonged to the chief, and that her fate would likely be decided in the next few minutes. An elderly man emerged from the chief's teepee, his weathered face marked with the scars and tattoos of a lifetime warrior. His hair was white as snow, braided with feathers and beads, and his eyes held a wisdom that seemed to see through to the soul. This was Chief Iron Bear, leader of the Iron Horse Band, and White Eagle's father. The chief listened silently as White Eagle explained Elena's presence, occasionally asking sharp questions that White Eagle answered in detail. Elena could feel the weight of Iron Bear's gaze as he studied her, and she fought to remain calm under such intense scrutiny. Finally, the chief spoke to Elena directly, his English heavily accented but clear. "You claim the blood of the Apache flows in your veins, child, but blood alone does not make one of the people. What makes you think you belong here among us?" Elena had been dreading this moment since leaving the forest clearing, but now that it had arrived, she found her voice steady and strong. "I don't know if I belong here," she said honestly, "but I know that I want to learn. I want to understand how to live in harmony with the land and with all creatures. I want to help stop the killing between our peoples." Iron Bear's eyes narrowed. Pretty words, but words are like wind. They blow away quickly. What will you do when the learning becomes hard? When my people test your spirit with pain and hardship, I will endure, Elena replied. My grandmother endured when she was taken from her birth family. My mother endured when she married a man who treated her badly. I will endure whatever tests you give me, because the alternative is watching both our peoples destroy each other. The chief was quiet for a long moment, then gestured to an elderly woman who had been standing nearby. This is Grandmother Willow, keeper of our traditions and teacher of our young women. If you are to learn our ways, you will learn them from her. The woman who approached Elena was tiny and bent with age, but her dark eyes sparkled with intelligence and humor. She circled Elena slowly, examining her from head to toe like a horse trader evaluating potential stock. Soft hands, Grandmother Willow muttered in heavily accented English. Soft body, soft spirit, maybe. We see. She reached out and pinched Elena's arm, nodding with satisfaction when Elena didn't pull away. But maybe some strength hiding inside soft shell. You will live in my teepee, the old woman continued. You will work with me, eat with me, learn from me. If you prove worthy, perhaps you become one of us. If not, she shrugged expressively, leaving the consequences unspoken. Elena bowed respectfully to the old woman. Thank you, Grandmother. I will do my best to honor the trust you place in me. Grandmother Willow snorted with amusement. Trust? Child, I give you no trust. Trust must be earned with time and proof. I give you only chance to earn trust. Do not confuse the two. As Elena followed Grandmother Willow toward her teepee, she became aware of the many eyes watching her every move. Some of the younger warriors called out comments that made others laugh, and while Elena couldn't understand the words, she could guess their meaning from the tone. They say you are too weak to survive one night among us. Grandmother Willow translated with apparent satisfaction. They make bets on how soon you will cry and beg to return to White Settlement. Elena felt anger flare in her chest, but she forced it down. What do you think, grandmother? The old woman's eyes twinkled with mischief. I think they underestimate power of stubbornness in young woman who has nothing left to lose. But we see. Grandmother Willow's teepee was larger than Elena had expected, with carefully organized sections for sleeping, cooking, and working. The walls were decorated with intricate beadwork and painted designs that seemed to tell stories of battles, hunts, and spiritual visions. In the center, a small fire pit provided warmth and light. This will be your sleeping place, Grandmother Willow said, pointing to a pile of buffalo robes in one corner. This will be your working place, she continued, indicating an area with tools for preparing food and crafting various items. And this, she said, pointing to a spot near the fire, is where you will learn to be quiet and listen. Elena nodded, understanding that her education was about to begin in earnest. What will I learn first? First, you learn that asking questions when you should be listening is a good way to earn beating, Grandmother Willow said sharply. Watch, listen, learn. Questions come later, when you know enough to ask intelligent ones. The days that followed were unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. She woke before dawn each morning to help Grandmother Willow prepare food for the day, learning to work with ingredients and cooking methods that were completely foreign to her settlement experience. Instead of salt pork and cornbread, she learned to prepare dried buffalo meat, wild roots, and various types of berries and nuts. The work was constant and demanding. Elena spent hours each day gathering firewood, hauling water, tending the fire, and helping with endless small tasks that kept the household running. Her hands, which had grown soft during her time in the settlement, quickly developed new calluses and strength. But the physical demands were only part of her education. Grandmother Willow insisted that Elena learn the language properly, correcting her pronunciation with sharp raps on the knuckles when she made mistakes. She taught Elena the complex etiquette that governed interactions between different members of the tribe, explaining who could speak to whom under what circumstances and how respect should be shown. Among our people, words have power, Grandmother Willow explained one evening as they worked by the firelight. Wrong word at wrong time can start war, break family, destroy friendship. You must learn to think before speaking, always. Elena found this aspect of Comanche culture particularly challenging. In the settlement, people had spoken freely and directly, often without much consideration for the impact of their words. Here, every conversation seemed to follow complex rules and subtle meanings that she was only beginning to understand. The other women in the camp were initially suspicious of Elena's presence, but Grandmother Willow's protection gave her a measure of acceptance. She was invited to join the women's work circles where they prepared hides, crafted clothing and tools, and shared news and gossip. Elena listened carefully to these conversations, gradually picking up more of the language and understanding more about the concerns and joys that occupied her new community. She learned that the band was facing serious challenges. White Settlement was advancing steadily into their traditional territory, driving away the buffalo herds that provided food, shelter, and tools. Young warriors were growing restless, wanting to strike back against the encroaching settlers, while older leaders counseled patience and strategic thinking. Our people are like river meeting dam, Morningstar explained to Elena one day as they worked together preparing hides. Water must go somewhere, but dam grows stronger. Soon, water must break dam or find new path. But both choices bring danger. Elena began to understand that her presence in the camp was not just about her own survival or education. She was seen by some as a potential source of information about white settlements and military movements. Others viewed her as a possible negotiator who might help find peaceful solutions to the growing conflicts. But there were also those who saw her as a threat, a spy who was learning Comanche secrets in order to betray them to white soldiers. These people made their feelings known through cold stares, deliberate snubs, and occasional acts of petty cruelty like hiding her tools or spoiling her work. The most vocal opponent of Elena's presence was a warrior named Broken Lance, who had lost his wife and children in a cavalry attack the previous year. He made no secret of his belief that Elena should be killed before she could bring disaster to the band. She watches everything, remembers everything. Elena heard him arguing with White Eagle one evening. When white soldiers come, She will tell them where to find us, how many warriors we have, what our weaknesses are. And if we kill her now? White Eagle replied. What then? Do we send her scalp back to the settlement as a message? Do we prepare for war that will destroy us all? War comes whether we want it or not, Broken Lance said bitterly. At least this way we choose the time and place instead of waiting for them to choose for us. Elena realized that her very presence was creating divisions within the community that had been unified before her arrival. The weight of responsibility grew heavier each day as she understood that her success or failure could determine not just her own fate, but the fate of both communities. Grandmother Willow seemed to sense Elena's growing anxiety and concern. One evening, as they sat working by the fire, the old woman spoke quietly about the burden of being different. When I was a young woman, I fell in love with Kiowa warrior, she said, her hands never pausing in their work. My family said this was betrayal of our people. His family said white blood had made me weak and untrustworthy. For a long time, I belonged nowhere, trusted by no one. Elena looked up from the moccasin she was beating. What happened? Time happened. Patience happened. Slowly, I proved my heart was true to the people, even if my blood was mixed. Slowly, Kiowa warrior proved his love for me was stronger than his people's suspicions. We married, had children, lived good life together. But how did you endure the waiting? How did you stand being distrusted and questioned all the time? Grandmother Willow's eyes crinkled with gentle humor. Same way water wears down stone, child. Not by fighting, but by flowing. By being patient, by being steady, by never giving up. As Elena's skills improved and her understanding of Comanche culture deepened, she began to find her place in the complex social fabric of the community. She proved herself useful in many small ways. Her knowledge of plant medicine came in handy when children fell ill. Her reading and writing skills helped when the band needed to interpret messages from white officials. And her growing fluency in both languages made her a valuable translator. But her most important contribution came when a group of young warriors returned from a failed raid with devastating news. They had attacked a military supply wagon, expecting to find weapons and ammunition, but had instead stumbled into a trap. Several warriors had been killed, and the survivors reported that the soldiers seemed to know exactly where the Comanche would strike. There is traitor among us, Broken Lance declared at the council meeting that followed. Someone has told white soldiers our plans. Elena felt all eyes turning toward her, and her heart sank as she realized that her presence made her the obvious suspect. But before anyone could voice accusations, she stood up and spoke clearly. If I were a spy, she said, would I warn you that the soldiers seem to know your plans? Would I tell you that there might be a traitor among you? A spy would stay silent and let more warriors die. Her logic was sound, and even Broken Lance seemed momentarily taken aback. White Eagle seized the moment to press the advantage. The girl speaks truth, he said. A spy would not warn us of danger. But someone has been carrying word to the soldiers. Someone who knows our plans before we make them. The investigation that followed revealed that one of the younger warriors, desperate to protect his sick mother and younger siblings, had been trading information to white traders in exchange for medicine and food. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community and forced everyone to confront the reality that the lines between friend and enemy were not as clear as they had once seemed. Elena found herself in an unexpected position during the crisis. Her outsider status, which had once made her suspect, now made her valuable as someone who could see the situation without the emotional baggage that clouded the judgment of those who had grown up in the community. What do you think we should do with him? Chief Iron Bear asked her directly after the guilty warrior had been identified. Elena thought carefully before answering. I think you should ask yourself what you hope to accomplish, she said finally. Do you want justice? Do you want to prevent future betrayals? Do you want to heal the wounds in your community? Different goals might require different actions. The chief nodded slowly. Wise words. And what would your people do in such situation? My people would probably hang him, Elena admitted. But I don't think that would solve the real problem. The real problem is that your people are being forced to choose between loyalty and survival. Until that changes, there will always be more traitors. The conversation continued long into the night, with Elena finding herself increasingly involved in discussions about strategy and diplomacy that she would never have imagined participating in just months before. She was no longer just a girl trying to survive among strangers. She was becoming a bridge between worlds, exactly as White Eagle had hoped. But bridges, Elena was learning, were vulnerable structures that could be destroyed by forces from either side. As winter approached, and tensions continued to rise throughout the region, she knew that her real test was still to come. The harsh winter tested everyone in the Comanche camp, but it tested Elena most of all. As the months passed and snow covered the prairie, food became scarce, and tempers grew short. The band had to move frequently to find adequate shelter and hunting grounds, and each move meant that Elena had to prove herself all over again to new groups of suspicious Comanche. It was during this difficult time that Elena met the man who would change her life forever. His name was Thunder Horse, and he was unlike any of the other warriors she had encountered during her time with the band. Where others were suspicious of her white heritage, he seemed genuinely curious about her experiences. Where others tested her with harsh challenges, he offered gentle guidance and protection. Thunder Horse was not originally from Iron Bear's band. He had come to them as a young man after his own family had been killed in a cavalry raid, and his status as an outsider who had earned acceptance gave him insight into Elena's struggles that others lacked. He first approached her on a bitter February evening when she was struggling to repair a torn teepee cover in the howling wind. Without speaking, he took one end of the heavy hide and helped her secure it properly, his strong hands making quick work of knots that had frustrated her for hours. "Thank you," Elena said in Comanche, grateful for the assistance. Thunder Horse studied her face in the firelight that flickered through the teepee walls. "You are learning our language well," he replied in careful English. "But you still think like white woman sometimes." Elena felt defensive. "What do you mean? You try to fix everything yourself, even when others would help if you asked. This is white way. Each person alone, fighting world. Our way is different. We are tribe, family, all connected." Over the following weeks, Thunder Horse continued to offer Elena guidance in subtle ways. He showed her how to read the weather signs that predicted the worst storms, taught her techniques for preserving food during the lean months, and helped her understand the complex relationships between different families in the band. But more than that, he began to show her the spiritual dimension of Comanche life that had remained largely hidden from her before. He explained how every hunt was also a ceremony, how every meal was an act of gratitude to the spirits of the animals and plants that sustained them, and how every decision had to be weighed against its impact on 7 generations in the future. White people see only what is in front of them, Thunder Horse explained one evening as they sat beside the fire. Today's hunger, today's cold, today's enemy. But we must see further, think deeper. What we do today shapes the world our children's children will inherit. Elena found herself drawn to this way of thinking, which was so different from the immediate survival concerns that had dominated her life in the settlement. Under Thunder Horse's patient tutelage, she began to understand that being Comanche was not just about learning skills and customs, but about fundamentally changing how she saw herself in relation to the world. As spring approached, Elena had been with the band for nearly a year. She had learned to speak Comanche fluently, to work hides with the skill of any woman in the tribe, and to contribute meaningfully to the complex web of relationships that held the community together. But she had not yet undergone the formal ceremonies that would make her a full member of the tribe. That changed when a delegation arrived from the settlement where Elena had grown up. Led by James Parker, the same man who had tried to rescue her in the forest clearing, the group included her mother, Reverend Williams, and several other respected members of the community. The arrival of these familiar faces stirred emotions in Elena that she had been suppressing for months. When she saw her mother's tear-stained face across the circle of warriors, she felt her carefully constructed composure crumble. "Mama," she whispered, and suddenly she was running across the space between them, forgetting all protocol and dignity in her desperate need to embrace the woman who had raised her. Maria Martinez sobbed as she held her daughter, her hands touching Elena's face as if to convince herself that this reunion was real. "Mija, we thought you were dead. When the men came back without you, I was sure we would never see you again." Elena clung to her mother, breathing in the familiar scent of sage and flower that always surrounded her. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be simply Elena Martinez, 16-year-old daughter of a struggling frontier family, rather than the bridge between worlds she had become. But the moment couldn't last. Chief Iron Bear approached the reunited family with the dignity and authority of his position, and Elena reluctantly stepped back from her mother's embrace. "Your daughter has become one of our people," the chief said in careful English. "She has proven her worth through trial and hardship. If she chooses to return to your world, she will leave as friend to our band. If she chooses to stay, she will be welcomed as true daughter of the Comanche." Parker spoke up, his voice tight with emotion. "We've come to take her home, Chief. Her family misses her, and her people need her. The choice is hers alone," Iron Bear replied firmly. "We do not keep prisoners here. All who live among us do so by their own will." Elena felt the weight of all eyes upon her, as the two worlds she had come to know waited for her decision. She looked at her mother's hopeful face, at the familiar settlers who had traveled so far to bring her home, and then at the Comanche who had become her teachers, protectors, and friends. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This decision will affect many people, and I don't want to make it hastily." Thunder Horse approached her that evening as she sat alone on a hill overlooking the camp. The lights of the teepee fires below looked warm and welcoming, while the cooking fires of the settler delegation glowed separately in their temporary camp nearby. "You are torn between two families," he observed, settling beside her on the grass. "I don't know where I belong anymore," Elena admitted. "When I'm with my mother and the people from the settlement, I remember who I used to be. But when I'm here, I feel like I become who I was always meant to be." Thunder Horse was quiet for a long moment. "There is something I must tell you," he said finally. "Something that may help you understand your path." Elena turned to look at him, surprised by the serious tone in his voice. "I have been watching you since you came to us," Thunder Horse continued. "Not just watching your skills or your courage, but watching your spirit. You have the heart of a peacemaker, someone who can build bridges where others see only walls. White Eagle said something similar when I first came here. White Eagle sees much, but even he may not see all that the spirits have planned for you." Thunder Horse paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "The white settlers are not your only family, and we are not your only people. You belong to something larger than either group." Elena frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "You belong to the future," Thunder Horse said simply. "To a time when white and red children will play together without fear, when the land will provide for all people without conflict, when the wisdom of both worlds can be shared freely." Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. "How can you be so certain?" Thunder Horse smiled, and in the moonlight his face looked both young and ancient. "Because I have seen it in visions. Because the spirits have shown me glimpses of what can be. And because I have fallen in love with the woman who will help make it possible." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "Thunder Horse, I know this complicates your choice," he said gently. "I do not speak to pressure you, but to let you know that whatever path you choose, you will not walk it alone." The next morning, Elena called for a council meeting that would include both the Comanche leadership and the delegation from the settlement. When everyone had gathered, she stood in the center of the circle and spoke in both languages, ensuring that all present could understand her words. "For almost a year, I have lived among the Comanche people," she began. "I have learned their language, their customs, and their ways of seeing the world. They have treated me with kindness and respect, and they have become my family in every way that matters." She saw relief beginning to dawn on the faces of the settlers, thinking she was about to announce her decision to return home. But Elena continued, "I have also learned that the conflict between our peoples will not end with my return to the settlement. The misunderstandings run too deep, the fear and hatred are too strong. More blood will be spilled on both sides unless something fundamental changes." Chief Iron Bear leaned forward, interested in where this was heading. "I propose to spend part of each year with each people," Elena said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "To live among the Comanche during the winter months when they need translators and negotiators to deal with white officials, and to return to the settlement during the summer when my knowledge of Comanche culture can help prevent conflicts." The suggestion created an immediate stir among both groups. Elena heard excited conversations in both English and Comanche as people discussed the implications of her proposal. "It's dangerous," Parker objected. "Traveling back and forth between the communities, being on the trail alone. Anything could happen to you." "I won't be alone," Elena replied, glancing at Thunder Horse. I will have protection and companions for the journeys. And the danger of travel is small compared to the danger of continued warfare. Her mother spoke up for the first time since the council had begun. Mija, are you certain this is what you want? To live always between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. Elena felt tears stinging her eyes. Mama, I think it's what I was born to do. Grandmother's spirit has been guiding me since I first came here. She lived between worlds too, and she found a way to serve both. The negotiations that followed were complex and difficult. Both sides had concerns about security, communication, and the practical details of implementing Elena's proposal. But gradually, agreement began to emerge around the basic framework she had suggested. Elena would spend the winter months with the Comanche band, serving as translator and cultural advisor for their dealings with white officials and traders. During the summer, she would return to the settlement to help resolve conflicts and misunderstandings before they could escalate into violence. Thunderhorse would accompany her on these journeys, both as protection and as a cultural ambassador from the Comanche to the white community. Over time, they hoped to establish regular communication and trade relationships that would benefit both groups. It will not be easy, Chief Iron Bear warned. There are people on both sides who prefer war to peace, who profit from hatred and fear. They will not welcome your efforts. I know, Elena replied. But I also know that there are good people on both sides who are tired of living in fear, who want their children to grow up in a better world. As the council meeting concluded and preparations began for implementing the new arrangement, Elena felt a sense of rightness about her decision that she had not experienced since leaving the settlement. She was no longer the frightened girl who had been abandoned in the forest as a sacrifice. She was a woman with a purpose, a mission that would define the rest of her life. That evening, as the two groups shared a meal together for the first time, Elena watched children from both communities playing together despite their language differences. She saw her mother deep in conversation with Grandmother Willow, two women finding common ground in their love for the same young woman. She saw Thunderhorse explaining Comanche horse training techniques to fascinated settlers, and white men sharing stories of farming with curious warriors. These small moments of connection and understanding were fragile, Elena knew. They could be shattered by a single act of violence or betrayal. But they were also the seeds from which a better future might grow. As Thunderhorse took her hand, and they walked together toward the hill where they had spoken the night before, Elena felt the weight of her destiny settling on her shoulders. It was a heavy burden, but it was also a gift, the opportunity to serve something larger than herself, to help heal wounds that had been festering for generations. Are you afraid? Thunderhorse asked quietly as they reached the top of the hill. Elena looked down at the camp where two communities that had been enemies were learning to see each other as human beings. Yes, she said honestly, but I'm more afraid of what happens if we don't try. Thunderhorse squeezed her hand gently. Then we will face the fear together, and we will build the bridge between worlds that the spirits have shown us in visions. Elena smiled, feeling peace settle into her heart for the first time since this strange journey had begun. She was no longer lost between two worlds. She was the connection that would help them find each other. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and challenging, but filled with the possibility of hope. And Elena Martinez, who had once been offered as a sacrifice to fear and hatred, had become instead a living symbol of what was possible when courage and love chose to build rather than destroy.